afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, March 17th, 2022. And a happy St. Patrick's Day to all my Irish or Irish descended listeners. This is St. Patrick's Day, and no, I'm not going to be drinking any green beer or eating any green bagels. And I'm not going to be drinking any Guinness, the Protestant porter, as they used to call it in Ireland. I don't know. Some people may still do. Some years ago, I wrote a short, very short parody of the miserablest school of modern Irish literature. So I'd like to read it for you. A trampin', berrackin', bollockin' man was our father oppression. His writ rang the length and breadth, the highways and the byways, the uphill and the downdale of County Turalura. And to be sure, any of us boys at St. Misery Guts had only to whisper a hint of a glimmer of a fancy of what we all wanted to do to witty, pretty Kitty McMahon behind Finnegan's cowshed, when then, as sudden as the rains that fell from the shimmering, slaty grey clouds above, he would appear before us, as tall and as terrible as old Finn McCool himself, stinking of the bacon sandwiches he stuffed in his soutane, of the Jamesons he swigged from a battered pewter flask, and of the lack of the deodorant he damned as a wicked Protestant innovation, the wrath of 1,000 dies iraes in his eyes, etc., etc. Here is something from the great Flann O'Brien, or Brian O'Nolan, that was his birth name. I think the greatest Irish writer, certainly the funniest. This poem is called The Workman's Friend. When things go wrong and will not come right, though you do the best you can, when life looks black as the hour of night, a pint of plain is your only man. When money's tight and hard to get and your horse is also ran, when all you have is a heap of debt, a pint of plain is your only man. When health is bad and your heart feels strange and your face is pale and wan, when doctors say you need a change, a pint of plain is your only man. When food is scarce and your larder bare and no rashers grease your pan, when hunger grows as your meals are rare, a pint of plain is your only man. In time of trouble and lousy strife, you still have got a darlant plan. You can still turn to a brighter life. A pint of plain is your only man. A plain, in this sense, means a plain porter beer. And while I'm on the subject of Ireland, here's something from 1997 from the first I'm Alan Partridge show, delivered by Steve Coogan, who is, well, English-Irish. His mother and his paternal grandfather were immigrants to England from Ireland. And in this episode, he is talking to two producers from RTE, the state television network in Ireland, and they think that perhaps Alan Partridge could do a show that would appeal to both English and Irish audiences. Of course, Alan Partridge never misses the opportunity to insult grossly pretty much everyone, and he bungles the interview from the start. He won't stop about the IRA and bombings. Keep in mind, this is 1997, and he completely misconstrues the meaning of U2's song Sunday Bloody Sunday, more of Bono in a minute. He thinks that Sunday Bloody Sunday is about how bloody boring Sundays are. And the two Irish producers, they want something different. And so Alan Partridge said, yeah, I think the Irish are going through a major image change. I mean, the old image of leprechauns, shamrocks, Guinness, horses running through council estates, toothless simpletons, people with eyebrows on their cheeks, badly tarmac drives in this country, men in platform shoes being arrested for bombings, lots of rocks and Beamish. I think people are saying, yes, there's more to Ireland than this. A good slogan for the tourist board. There's more to Ireland than this. Needless to say, Alan Partridge does not get the show. Of course, 1997, shortly before this myth of the Celtic Tiger took hold of Ireland, where the Irish people and their leadership seemed to believe that Ireland was going to become an economic powerhouse based on what tax shelters for pharmaceutical companies and companies like Microsoft. It didn't work out well for the Irish. They ended up being pretty much owned lock, stock, and barrel by the EU, particularly Germany. And of course, Ireland is now, the countryside of Ireland is now despoiled with ridiculously shoddy but ridiculously expensive houses that were largely abandoned when the bottom fell out of the Celtic Tiger dream. For all the toothless simpletons and people with eyebrows on their cheeks of the old Ireland, I must say I think it was a better place than Ireland today, which is a deeply irreligious or anti-religious country, really, and perhaps the most woke country in the Western world. One, which I was speaking about this on the live stream a couple of weeks ago, is almost entirely run by NGOs, sinister NGOs. Let's have a look at the chat. Okay. Hello to Dan and Dan Allison, Buddy Anrun, Don Willis, Green Donuts. No. No, hello to Clear Sky. What about Tio Pepe? Not tonight. Not tonight. Hello to Chogokin666. Buddy, Kevin, who are some of your highest rated Irish ladies? I'd say off the top, the American actress Kathy O'Donnell, who in fact her name wasn't Kathy O'Donnell, but she was the Queen of the Bee pictures. She made two with Farley Granger, and I'm gonna have to talk about one of them soon because it's a curious ability of the movies to take a woman, put her on the screen, and make her the most desirable woman in the world. And the screen was very kind to Kathy O'Donnell. In fact, of course, in the noirs, things get pretty unpleasant, and I find myself thinking, I don't want to live in a world where Kathy O'Donnell cries. Hello to Yo Mama. Is it bad taste to wear orange today? Well, the flag of the Republic of Ireland has orange on it. I've got orange here, along with the green. Hello to William Hicks. Finn McCool. Yes, indeed. Hello to Stephen Costanza. I'm 14%, he says. David Wright says, let's acknowledge our rightist friends who are Irish haters. Derbyshire, Z-Man to start. 50% are here. Is Kathy Ireland Irish? I don't know. If her surname is actual, then one would think that at one time, but let's look her up on Wikipedia. No, it just says she's the daughter of John and Barbara Ireland. Not much info. No, wait, we've got more here. We've got more. No, that's all I can find. Well, that's all I can find within 30 seconds. So sorry I couldn't be more help. Hello to the German Pointer. Dan Allison says, I read the Bono poem, and you're going to hear it from me. He really is in decline as a lyricist. Kathy Ireland, Hard Nine says, Buddy. Years ago, I got into this argument, not quarrel, but argument about Kathy Ireland on Luke Ford's show, where I said that she epitomized the difference between attractiveness and beauty, that she's not a beauty, but in terms of attractiveness, very, very high indeed. Hard Nine says, Buddy. David Wright says 10. L. McPherson, surely Irish, another Hard Nine. Well, you mentioned that word hard, a very hard face. A Burke is an Irish surname. No, indeed it is. Choke again, 666. Maureen O'Hara, yowza, says William Hicks. Contra Coup says, how much can progressives claim to care for the Ukraine or any European country for that matter? They would cheer invasion and destruction if it were at the hands of African immigrants after all. Well, yes. Don Willis says, this whole I'm Irish is tiresome. Anran says, sad to hear even Tucker going on about Russian atrocities and Putin being evil and crazy. Well, I suppose he has to say those things. Don Willis says, Irish Spring will keep snakes away from your yard. Hello to Martin Matushak. Pro-Putin media folks are nowhere to be found, says Don Willis. Well, I am going to be talking about that shortly. A silly controversy about Steely Dan, which, I don't know, was a 24-hour controversy, 48-hour controversy. Let's have the latest here. This is from Rachel DeSantis at People magazine. Steely Dan's Donald Fagen has issued an apology to Amy Mann after she was removed from the band's upcoming tour, but squashed the singer's speculation that she was taken off the bill because she's a woman. Mann, 61, raised eyebrows Wednesday after she shared a comic strip to Instagram lamenting the fact that she'd been ousted as the opener for Steely Dan's upcoming summer tour. No one is entirely sure why, but it seems like they thought their audience wouldn't like a female singer-songwriter, ? She wrote, captioning the post, bummer. As it happens, Steely Dan is the one band that I 100% love with no reservations, so it really sucks. But you know what? People are allowed to not like you for whatever reason. In response, Fagen, 74, denied Mann's line of reasoning and said her gender had nothing to do with the decision. Well, first of all, the idea that I would make any decision based on the gender of a performer is ridiculous. He said that's something in the world that would never even occur to me. The dirty work singer, you have to identify who Steely Dan is, and dirty work. That's a Steely Dan deep cut from their first record. A curious choice. You could have, used Peg, say. He went on to admit there was a communication problem on our end and that he had been misinformed as to how firm the commitment was to any particular opening act. Although I have the greatest respect for Aimee as a writer and performer, I thought it might not be the best matchup in terms of musical style, but I can't pass the buck. I'll take the blame for the screw-up. I apologize for any distress this has caused Aimee and her fans. Despite her apparent disappointment, Mann seemed to take the development in stride and joked on Twitter Wednesday night, all is forgiven if Donald just tells me what Brooklyn is about. Brooklyn is another deep cut from Steely Dan's first record. Before I get into that, there were thousands and thousands of tweets lambasting Donald Fagen, and yes, Steely Dan, who's even ever heard of them? Well, I don't know, or who even listens to them. Rather more popular than Aimee Mann. Not that I have anything against Aimee Mann at all, particularly since she said in an interview that she loves Peter Blegvad. I love Peter Blegvad. We're a small band of followers in the world. Oh, here's a typical one. This is really unfair. Just because Steely Dan fans have never seen a woman doesn't mean they won't like them. A lot of them were probably looking forward to finally seeing one. Well, you don't sell as many records as Steely Dan has if your audience is made up of incels. Jason Isbell, is it pronounced Isbell or Isbell, who is a musician. He said, my wife hates Steely Dan. I've discussed that with Aimee Mann, who truly loves Steely Dan. Now I'll never again try to convince my wife that Steely Dan is good. Oh, yes. Got to get that virtue signaling in there, Jason Isbell. Got to let the whole world know that you're taking a brave stand against misogyny. Oh, I see the Jason Isbell 400 unit solo career, Drive-By Truckers, okay, has won 4 Grammy Awards. So the song Brooklyn owes the charmer under me. A race of angels bound with one another, a dish of dollars laid out for all to see, a tower room at Eden Rock, his golf at noon for free. Brooklyn owes the charmer under me. His lady's aching to bring a body down. She daily preaches on where she wants to be. An evening with a movie queen, a face we all have seen. Brooklyn owes the charmer under me. A case of aces done up loose for dealing, a piece of island cooling in the sea, the whole of time we gain or lose, and power enough to choose. Brooklyn owes the charmer under me. Well, there's two school of thoughts about this song, which is that it's about a neighbor, in fact, a neighbor in the apartment directly underneath Donald Fagen's in Brooklyn when he lived there, what, in the early 70s, late 60s or early 70s. And the two school of thoughts is that, well, Eden Rock is a clue. Eden Rock is a very famous hotel in Miami. And so that this man has suffered greatly living in Brooklyn, all manner of small humiliations, and it's a tribute to him and how he deserves a better life. The other school of thought is that it's sarcastic, that the charmer who lives under him is a whiner, a complainer, not a particularly lovable man. So there's some analysis on a deep cut Steely Dan song. A brief word about Canada here. The supposed frontrunner for the conservative leader of the Conservative Party of Canada is a MP called Pierre Poilievre, who is ever so conservative. Yeah, no, he isn't. He's one of these Chamber of Commerce, free enterprise types. He is interviewed by Shannon Proudfoot at Maclean's, and he gives the game away. He talks about choice. That's the highest value, choice. This is what the establishment conservatives have been saying for decades. And if you seek its monument, look around you. I think that he's playing the same game that Brian Mulroney did. Brian Mulroney was ever so right wing when he was running for the leadership of the Conservative Party, and when he became opposition leader, and then when he became prime minister in 1984, we discovered that it was business as usual, only more so. Liberal Tory, same old story. He's asked, I'm not sure if I understand what Pierre Poilievre's Canada looks like in 20 years when your career is over. What would you consider a success? That Canada is the freest place in the world, that hundreds of thousands of immigrants want to come here every year because they know it's the best place on earth. You see, there's a problem here. Pierre Poilievre is running on a rather inchoate platform that Canada is totally screwed up because of Liberal leadership, and Canada has been led by the Liberal Party with little interruptions since, 1963. So on the one hand, Canada is the best place on earth, but Pierre Poilievre intends to turn it upside down. Now, why? Why would you turn it upside down if it is the best place on earth? They know it's the best place on earth in which to work hard, start a business, raise their kids, earn a scholarship, and achieve their dreams. This is a place where you're free to believe what you want, spend your money how you want, build a future that you want, that we become a country of boundless opportunity. Well, look, again, if Canada is the immigrant's dream, why does Pierre Poilievre want to monkey around with it? But no, you see, we have to make Canada a fit country for immigrants. The rest of us can go to blazes. Pierre Poilievre has no problem with the Great Replacement. He cheers it on because immigrants are better than Native Canadians. And this has been a powerful stream in the Conservative Party, as it was in the Alliance Party and the Reform Party before that. These are anti-patriots we're talking about here. And of course, one of the big problems that Poilievre has with Canada is that apparently there are too many Canadians earning a decent wage, which is why he wants to bribe provincial governments into fast tracking the acceptance of foreign qualifications. Yep, yep, we got these shortages. Well, then train Canadians. They never talk about that because they're all whoring after the immigrant vote or the immigrant cohort vote. And never mind policy. That has nothing to do with who is going to become the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. The next leader will be chosen based on their ability to assemble an instant, phantom, largely phony army of Sikhs. That's how every leader is chosen, and it will not be any different this time. So let's talk about, yeah, that country again, that country that you didn't give a toss about until, a month ago, but now it is ever so close to your heart. That would be the Ukraine. And Joe Biden made a very strange statement the other day. He was talking about revenge porn, and he was talking about, well, you all know someone who's had, pictures taken of them, embarrassing pictures, which are then used to blackmail them. Really? We all know someone like that? Lots of these pictures are used to embarrass people, but to blackmail them? No. And people thought, is he talking about his son, Hunter Biden? Well, you remember the New York Post got a hold of one of Biden's laptops, which had been brought to a computer repair shop and then abandoned. And it just sat there for months, and money was owed. And so the owner took possession of it. And he took a look therein, and there was some pretty shocking stuff there. Shocking stuff about drugs and sex and, well, about the Ukraine and China. And the New York Post got a hold of a copy of the hard drive, and they had a blockbuster story just before the 2020 presidential election, with the rest of the media crushed. People were being banned from social media from talking about it. And the rest of the media said, all made up Russian disinformation. Well, now the New York Times has said, no, the laptop is real, and it has these emails on it, and it's not Russian disinformation. When one considers the story choices in the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, very satirical. This is rather like the old Kremlinology. What's going on there? Is Joe Biden going to be hung out to dry? But of course, if he resigns, or he is 25th Amendmented, then Kamala the Cackler becomes president, which is, as the kids like to say, problematic. So is the Ukraine, is what's going on here? Is this a war for Hunter Biden? This is from Wendell Husbo at Breitbart. 15 establishment media personalities claimed Hunter Biden's laptop emails were likely Russian propaganda before the New York Times admitted it yesterday. After nearly 2 years of dismissing Hunter's tantalizing emails uncovered before the 2020 presidential election, the Times admitted the laptop was authentic. The media personality seemingly went out of the way to connect Russian dots of so-called disinformation that did not exist for the purpose of supporting the Democratic nominee for president, Joe Biden, the father of Hunter, and who now oversees the Justice Department's investigation into Hunter's possible tax fraud and corrupt business dealings with foreign entities. You will recall that the impeachment of Donald Trump, well, the first impeachment, was supposed to be about Russia, but then it ended up being about Ukraine. That you will recall that Trump was speaking to the president of Ukraine, and given that the Ukraine is a puppet state of the United States, Trump was demanding some transparency with regard to corruption investigations. And a hero, one of the greatest heroes, called Alexander Vindman, who was born in the Ukraine, amusingly, he leaked the contents of this telephone call, which Trump had already released. And oh my God, why is the United States browbeating the Ukraine? Golly, I wonder why. And so now there are rumors going about that the reason that Biden is not quite all in, but almost all in on the great crusade of Ukrainian sovereignty is because of blackmail. Obviously, there are people in the Ukraine who know a great deal about Hunter Biden and Father Joe. Of course, Hunter Biden had a no-show job at Burisma, a major, they call it a gas company. It's not really a gas company. It's a holding company where he was getting paid $50,000 a month, sometimes more, for what exactly? Well, influence peddling. Yeah, that's all it could be. Those business dealings, according to Breitbart, reportedly took place throughout the world and may have involved Joe Biden himself. Such was the media's necessity to dub the emails Russian disinformation instead of asking journalistic questions like Emma Jo Morris, who is now Breitbart's political editor and author of the original Laptop from Hell story from the New York Post. So who are the guilty? MSNBC's executive producer Kyle Griffin, publisher of The Ink, Anand Giridharadas, Daily Beast reporter Wajahat Ali, managing editor of Truth or Fiction Brooke Binkowski, NBC News correspondent Heidi Prisbilla, writer Chip Franklin, MSNBC contributor Ben Rhodes, Washington Post opinion columnist Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy, MSNBC's Naveed Jamali, Mother Jones, CNN anchor Brian Stelter, and CNN anchor Wolf Blitzer, NBC News correspondent Ken Delanian, MSNBC's Morning Joe regular contributor Dave Ehrenberg, and CNN author Jim Sciutto. Yes, they were all wrong, or they lied. I think they lied, and they knew that they were lying. If this story had gotten the attention that it should have gotten before the election, who knows how the election would have turned out. Even if Biden had won, he would have entered the White House with a big dark cloud hanging over him. But no, can't have that. This is from Ethan Schanfeld at Variety. Simultaneously celebrating St. Patrick's Day and addressing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Nancy Pelosi read a new poem written by Bono on Thursday at the annual Friends of Ireland luncheon. Bono has been a very Irish part of our lives, the Speaker of the House said before launching into the poem. The U2 frontman's poem compared the legend of St. Patrick, who drove all the snakes of Ireland into the sea, to the war in Ukraine. In Bono's metaphor, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is St. Patrick, and Russian President Vladimir Putin represents the snakes. President Joe Biden, among others on Capitol Hill, were in attendance. Here is the poem in toto. Oh, St. Patrick, he drove out the snakes with his prayers, but that's not all it takes. Oh my God, this is bad. For the snake symbolizes an evil that rises and hides in your heart as it breaks. As it breaks? What? And the evil has risen, my friends, from the darkness that lives in some men, but in sorrow and fear, that's when snakes can appear. Does it arise from darkness or sorrow and fear? To drive out those old snakes once again, and they struggle for us to be free. What? From the psycho in this human family, very poetical. Ireland's sorrow and pain is now the Ukraine, and St. Patrick's name now Zelensky. A hero of our time. Both Bono and Zelensky, of course. Let's go back to the chat here. Of course, Biden was talking about Putin. What were the words that he used? Vile, killer, mass killer, evil, etc., etc., etc. Since it is St. Patrick's Day, I should mention that it was a tradition for many years for the President of the United States on St. Patrick's Day to invite and to celebrate in the Rose Garden one of the IRA's murderers, such as Martin McGuinness. Martin McGuinness once admitted to a British cabinet minister that he murdered an Irish woman because she was a Catholic Irish woman because she was not sufficiently pro IRA. Yes, yes, chasing the Irish vote, chasing the votes of the plastic patties. So, yeah, they had no problem. This happened when Obama was president and Biden was vice president. They had no problem in touting the virtues of the murderous thugs of the Irish Republican Army. Oh, and here's a story. Here's a story from November the 7th, 2020. This is from the London Sun. Joe's IRA shame. Joe Biden cuddles IRA chief with Sinn Féin's Gerry Adams as they discuss a united Ireland. Joe Biden has been pictured cuddling an IRA chief with Sinn Féin's Gerry Adams as they reportedly discussed a united Ireland. He posed for a picture in 2017 with his arm around IRA fugitive Rita O'Hare and Sinn Féin President Adams in 2017. Adams shared the photo to Twitter in September of that year. He wrote that the trio had a good conversation about the Northern talks, United Ireland, and Brexit. After they had met, Adams said, "We also spoke of the potentially very damaging effect of Brexit on the island of Ireland, and in particular the implications for the border and for the Good Friday Agreement." In 1972, Mrs. O'Hare was arrested for the attempted murder of a British Army officer in Belfast. She was released on bail and fled to Dublin, where the High Court ruled that she could not be extradited to the UK. Mrs. O'Hare is understood to be one of 200 IRA suspects who were promised that they wouldn't be prosecuted as part of the peace process in Northern Ireland. British politicians issued a warning to Biden over the photo. Conservative MP Paul Bristow, the son of an army officer, told the Daily Mail, "I'm sure that this is an association that Biden regrets." Really? Does he? I doubt it. It was Bill Clinton and Tony Blair who got together and decided to throw Ireland to the wolves, that is to say, to the tender mercies of the IRA and their fig leaf political party, Sinn Féin. I don't see a lot of shame about that. Who else do we have in the chat here? Just hang on a second. Clem Burke, great drummer, snappy dresser, says Chogokin 666. And hello to John S. and Jean Betard de Precariat. Dan Ellison says, my experience is that women don't like Steely Dan. One of my favorite Steely Dan moments was when they beat up the Eagles. Yes, in Yacht Rock. Yes. What did they say? Taste bat or something like that? They were being bullied as nerds by the Eagles, and then they got their revenge. A hilarious joke in that episode where Donald Fagen spoke in a sort of beatnik patois so thick that he needed an interpreter. Hello to Head McNeck, just dropping in for a second to remind you, ladies and germs, to smash that like button. Oh, Don Willis is beautiful. It's almost like Becker and Fagan studied under Sting. British America says Polly Everett is an entirely plastic action figure and fake. Even his hair looks plastic. I wish Bernier could just absorb the CPC into his PPC. Hello to Dr. Deadname. Chablatarski says Amy Mann was the second best musician that appeared in the Big Lebowski. Yes, she played one of the anarchists, and she lost a toe for it. Flea was third or fourth. Jimmy Dale. Gilmore takes the first spot. Joe wants to believe that we're all as depraved as him and his family, and that therefore he's not going to hell, says British American. That Joe Biden fellow would make a great president, thought no one ever, says Che Blutarski. True, Greenbeard says it wouldn't even matter if they exposed every skeleton in Hunter and Joseph's closets. And hang on, it just skipped on me. Hang on, sorry about that. Hello, Metal Mike. Max Das Boot, yes. Wolf Blitzer is a pretty crazy name too, says Dr. Dead Name. U2 hasn't put out a good album since, 1992, says Metal Mike. Hey, I thought Ukes were Slavs, says Metal Mike. Apparently they don't consider themselves to be Slavs. Well, the Banderites who wield the muscle through the Azov Brigade and elsewhere in the Ukrainian army, they hate the Eastern Ukrainians and consider them to be savages. Orcs was the word used by an official of the Ukrainian government the other day. Orcs, savages. Banderite, I thought they were subhuman and should be dealt with accordingly. These are the people. These are our friends, by the way. True Greenberg said in the second verse, Bono speaks of a leprechaun, Zelensky guarding a pot of gold, Ukraine. Their language is totally Slavic. It's basically Russian with a flatter accent, says Berkin Sultanov. Tom Anderson says, I hate the Eagles. I couldn't agree more. Hello to Oscar Toe. Thank you for your kind greeting. Berkin Sultanov says Zelensky's video before Congress was awful. They could barely clap. Average age being ancient. Sunday Bloody Sunday was about the Ukrainian plight, says Oscar Toe. And of course, Alan Partridge thought it was all those newspapers. That man is a human NGO, says Joking 666 of Bono. And okay. Remember Wolf Blitzkrieg being humiliated on Jeopardy? Of course you do. He wishes you don't, says British American. Okay. Oh, yes. Bono loves Ireland, offshore all his assets, says Joking 666. Rather embarrassing, but swept all under the rug, that when Bono was talking about the great debt, that the North owed the South, and come on, it's time to pony up. It was revealed that Bono, that U2's assets were held in a tax shelter in, I believe, Liechtenstein. Yeah. But once again, I will remind you all, now the internet has largely been swept clean of this, but if you're diligent, you can find it. U2 began as a Protestant religious cult in Dublin. I believe there was something like I could say a dozen, but that number is rather fraught when one is talking about religion. Let's talk about oikophobia, a term popularized in the modern political sense by the late philosopher Roger Scruton. It's one that I've used many times, and now it's being turned on me by Ed West. I reviewed one of Ed West's books on the book club and praised it. I'm a fan of his writing and of his brother, Patrick. They are, of course, both sons of Richard West, the late political correspondent associated with Spectator and Private Eye, and of Mary Kenny. So he has a piece on his Substack, The Oikophobia of the Right, as the Ukrainian war shows some conservatives have come to hate the West. On the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, the Daily Telegraph reported that Britain's spies were being told to check their white privilege and stop using sexist words like manpower. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Defense was asking people to nominate their favorite alphabet people books. And while the tweet was since deleted, I think everyone will share the sentiments of this colorfully named Twitter user. Who might that be? Oh, yes, it is I. Putin is, and I'm going to repeat that. Yeah, there's a war going on. There's an expletive before war. This will make amusing little anecdotes for some future chronicler of February 2022, examples of civilizational hubris about to face its nemesis, or maybe not, as it turns out. Gay army book clubs are culture war finery, the sort of thing that gets noticed because it provokes a reaction to conservatives' elite obsession with sexual identity, is seen as a mark of civilization in decline, interested only in pleasure and narcissism. Perhaps it might not be important in itself, but as part of a wider decadence for a country in which the army fusses over sexual identity surely isn't capable of defending its values, leaving itself vulnerable to a more virile and predatory civilization from outside. To progressives, freedom, including sexual freedom, is who we are. Indeed, it's almost why we fight. Soon after the invasion, MI6 head Richard Moore tweeted that, quote, with the tragedy and destruction unfolding so distressingly in Ukraine, we should remember the values and hard-won freedoms that distinguish us from Putin, none more than alphabet people rights, unquote. Never mind that Ukraine is also pretty conservative on this issue, Ed West points out. That as a sentiment from one of the British state's most important figures illustrates the great divergence of values within Western countries, one not seen since the Reformation, and shows which side of that divide is firmly in control. It also goes some way to explaining the small but significant section of Western conservatives who now see no real moral difference between Russia and the West. They represent a new phenomenon, the oikophobia of the right. Oikophobia was Roger Scruton's term to describe the repudiation of inheritance and home, the way that many socialists and progressives are motivated by a loathing for their own country, their own countrymen, and often their hometowns, from which they wish to escape and punish its inhabitants. In the case of the early Bolsheviks, in many ways trailblazers of modern progressivism, their radical politics were often motivated by contempt for liberal parents and hatred of the unintellectual imbeciles they grew up around. Oikophobia has long defined the far left's foreign policy, which is essentially to always side with our enemies, what one socialist site calls campism. In Britain, it dates back to at least 1789, even after it became clear that the revolution, the French Revolution, was a disaster, and with the emergence of Napoleon Bonaparte as a dictator. Leading Whig Charles James Fox called Bonaparte the most stupendous monument of human wisdom in the House of Commons. Many artists openly sided with France, and when they felt they could no longer justify supporting such a tyranny, they backed their own country with ill grace. I should point out that Thomas Jefferson, this sounds fantastic, but it's true. He wrote in a letter at the time that it would be better if the human race were reduced to Adam and Eve, that is, two people, than the French Revolution. Fail. West continues, there was strong opposition to Britain from two particular sects, the Quakers and the Unitarians, members of the latter group a few years later starting a famous newspaper in Manchester, that would be The Guardian. One Unitarian minister, Ebenezer Aldred, said Britain was the real beast of revelation, guilty of imperialism, slave trading, and sodomy, in the words of Robert Toombs. Even if the reality of revolutionary France didn't match the fantasy, that didn't really matter because what they were actually was against was Britain, Oikophobia. Germany, both under the Kaiser and especially Hitler, was too repulsive and anti-intellectual to attract many British admirers, but revolutionary Russia found many often clearly motivated by a certain disgust with England. The pilgrims who lauded Stalin's grotesque experiment did so in part to express deep contempt for their own homeland. During the Cold War, various politicians, writers, and artists were prepared to apply a completely false equivalence between the two superpowers. Indeed, one or two of the USSR's defenders are still MPs today. In the US, Angela Davis's career has not been harmed by her open support for America's enemies. Indeed, it seems to have helped. Others went on to bat for various murderous regimes, including even revolutionary Iran, which Michel Foucault praised as the most insane. Yes, it really was, you old pedophile. So the far left's initial moral equivalence on the Russian invasion is normal and predictable. It would be worrying if they didn't side with our enemies or claim that both sides were at fault. Okay, this is the gist of my disagreement with Ed West. Our enemies? The Ukraine is not Britain's ally. It is not America's ally. It is not Canada's ally. These three countries are members of NATO. Turkey is closer to us in terms of allyship than the Ukraine. We are not at war with Russia, and Russia is not the Soviet Union. We've been through this before. Various times we're told we're all we're all Israelis now, or after 9/11, we're all Americans now. Well, no, actually. The Ukraine is not my country. The Ukrainians are not my people. And I'm sick to death of people from countries that can't even be bothered to defend their own borders and their own people, demanding that we swear fealty to a country that, again, few people had heard of or paid any attention to until a month ago, and which, by the way, is a vicious, corrupt, oligarchical regime, which is, in fact, the result of an illegal coup d'etat fomented by neoconservatives. Uh, Ed West claims that many populists have badly misjudged this conflict, as Eric Kaufman wrote this week, and I talked about his piece a few days ago. I watched as Tucker Carlson and J.D. Vance defended Putin or adopted the Kremlin's critique of Ukraine, Carlson calling it a pure client state of the United States State Department, which it is, while there are claims for a realist case tempering Ukrainian demands and accommodating reasonable Russian security concerns, the inability of some to reject the moral equivalence of Ukraine and Russia was glaring. How about all the shelling of the Donbass for years and years and years? Their deliberate attempt to kill children and their very successful attempt to destroy as many churches as possible, over 100, in fact. Do you ever hear anything about that? No, you didn't. One, because our side was supposedly the Ukraine, and two, well, we didn't give a toss about the Ukraine before last month. And he's touting Kaufman here. Kaufman is the author of the book White Shift, which I reviewed on the old book club. The gist of which this book is that white people are disappearing, and that's a good thing. We should attempt to get the best bargain that we can because our doom is inevitable. I'm not inclined to take advice from such a man. Now, let's talk more about this. I've been trying to concentrate a little more on the well springs of this conflict rather than the he said, she said stuff. And oh yes, the dead children like broken dolls in the street, as Evelyn Waugh famously parodied hysterical war coverage. I mentioned the site Russians with Attitude. Well, they have a Substack as well. This is fascinating stuff. Bohemicus on the Ukraine, a popular Russian blogger's historical, cultural, and geopolitical analysis of what's happening in Ukraine, written well before the war. Bohemicus, writing at bohemicus.livejournal.com, used to be one of the most widely read conservative Russian non-bloggers on a wide array of topics, but mostly the beloved Russian genre of speculative geopolitics with a whiff of conspiracy theory. Here's a selection from his blog posts written in 2013 to 2014, both before and after the Maidan, before and after the beginning of the Donbass War. At times prescient, at times cruel, we think that his point of view is a valuable glimpse into what many Russians, especially the ones prone to independent but not westernized thinking, think about the current conflict. Please note that reproducing this text does not mean that we agree with everything he says. Quote, if you live in America, you probably know what a civil war is: Union versus Confederation, North versus South, Yankee versus Dixie. Americans have lost more people in this war than in all foreign wars combined in their history. Do you understand what this means? In the war with the separatist Southerners, Americans have lost more people than in 2 world wars, as well as the Korean, Vietnam, and all the other wars combined, and they never regretted it. While suppressing Southern separatism, Americans have reached the deepest depths of cruelty. What is described in Gone with the Wind is cute nonsense compared to what was actually happening, and they never regretted it. Because without Dixieland, America is not really America. Ukraine is a Russian Dixie. Without Ukraine, Russia is not really Russia. Russian sovereignty over Ukraine must be restored at any cost, and Russians will restore it sooner or later, even if they have to do terrible things to achieve it, and they will never regret it. If you are an American, then behave like an American. Look at the Russians and their actions as a mirror image of what Americans did in the very same situation. And don't squeal like Ukrainian separatists do. Don't embarrass your country and its great history. Bohemicus continues. From the Russian point of view, Ukraine is an integral part of Russia temporarily occupied by separatists. Other views on the subject are possible, but they, by definition, are deeply non Russian. Without the Baltic states, the Caucasus, or Central Asia, Russia remains Russia. Whether it remains Russia without Ukraine is debatable. And it's not about being brotherly nations, it's a geographic destiny. Every single great power would have had the same exact opinion on the Ukrainian question if they were put in our place. In fact, they adhere to the same principle when it comes to disputed territories of their own of similar importance. France had lost Alsace and Lorraine, and it had been waging wars for centuries to get them back. The British waged genocide on the unfriendly Scottish Highlander population to control the territory they considered to be their own. No serious country has ever stopped because of international outrage and will never stop. Therefore, the very question of will Ukraine accept Russia is humorous in its nature. Russians are completely uninterested in this. This territory is important to us, not the opinion of its population about us. Nothing personal, just geography. Ukraine has signed its death sentence at the very moment when it abandoned Russian as their state language. Rejection of Russian culture and Russian history automatically followed suit. No European people has ever done such a bizarre thing. The question of independence is not related to the question of language at all. Look at the Western Hemisphere. All European colonists who gained independence preserved both the language of the former metropolis and its cultural tradition. Moreover, even the Irish, who shed rivers of blood in the struggle for independence from the hated British, retained English as the state language, leaving the Irish language as an exotic hobby for enthusiasts. In the normal course of event, the status of the Ukrainian language in Ukraine would roughly correspond to the status of Irish in Ireland, or taking into account its geographical location in Galicia and in the surrounding areas, the status of French in Canada. That is a regional language and it cannot be a national one. If Ukraine wanted to be a full-fledged state, its only official language had to be Russian. Bohemicus continues, all the people of importance who were born in the Ukraine consider themselves to be Russian. Gogol, Chekhov, and Bulgakov looked upon Ukrainianism with good-natured irony at best. Of course, the inhabitants of today's Ukraine have all the rights to the cultural heritage of historical Russia, and even some special rights to Gogol, Chekhov, and Bulgakov. But Ukrainians chose to declare themselves separate from the Russians instead. That is, they disinherited themselves. To be a European nation, you need to have ancestors who in the 18th century wore wigs with curls and not Turkish Osaledets haircuts. I've said more than once that for a number of reasons, the Age of Enlightenment is of key importance for understanding Russian history and culture in general. It is sad that the state does so little to study this era. Classical Russian culture would be enough for at least 300 or 500 million people, maybe a billion. Ukrainianism is assembled from what was not useful to either Russians or Poles. What came out of it was Kobzar, Shevchenko's poetry collection, as the central work, the Konotop battle as the key event, and other freakery, Kazhatiria Cossacks, Zaporozhye Republic, the Constitution of Prilip Orlik. All of that wouldn't be enough for even a small Balkan country. Both Serbia and Croatia have a much more solid history and culture. What nation can you sustain on a strict diet of Kobzar and Konotop battle? Macedonia, maybe. But Ukraine is a country of 40 million people. On its scale, Kobzar and Konotop are null. They voluntarily rejected the civilization that they belonged to. Choosing fake Cossacks with Osaledsi as their ancestors, Ukrainians became more alien in the eyes of Europeans than Turks. If we call things by their proper names outside of the Russian cultural and historical space, Ukraine automatically turns into Africa. Since the Maidan, Ukrainians have invariably shocked Russians with their actions online and in real life. Self-identification based on jumping on the spot, who does not jump is a Muscovite, clearly resembles the customs of the Mau Mau rebels. Treating your own Eastern compatriots as insects, colorads, with their subsequent brutal murder in Odessa, it's like they copied the actions of the Hutus who began the Tutsi genocide in Rwanda by broadcasting calls to exterminate the cockroaches. That's about 40% of this essay, which I commend to you, which you can find at the RWA Samizdat Substack, or you can find a link on the Russians with Attitude Twitter page. Oh, yes. What are we fighting for? Family values, I suppose, is one of the things that we are fighting for, but we don't hear that phrase, family values, much anymore because it doesn't mean quite what it used to mean. I don't like this term values because values are endlessly mutable. I prefer the word truths, but we don't hear much of this word truth anymore because, what is truth after all? So, not that long ago, the idea of so called conservatives praising gay adoption or the myth that homosexual men can have children, that would have been too much, even for the conservatives. But now it's to be celebrated. And a good example of this is Christopher Rufo, who some famous movement conservative and his husband somehow managed to procure not one, but two children. Now, apparently, you need two now. Pete Buttigieg and his husband, Chasen Buttigieg. Yeah, not one, but two. Now, the fact that these children are procured from poor women, well, let's not talk about that. Again, if they didn't want to lose their children, they should have chosen richer parents, or certainly, parents with IQs, a standard deviation or two higher than the one they ended up with. But no, all the movement conservatives just cheering up a storm for homosexuals procuring children from poor women. That's the way we live now. And I again, as I've been saying, don't call yourself a conservative. Let's see, Pierre Poilievre. Oh, he thunders against racism in his interview with Maclean's magazine. And what is racism? Who gets to define what racism is? They do. They get to define it. And essentially, it means whatever they don't like. White people are blamed for everything. They're not given credit for their contributions. No, they are just blamed for everything. If they leave communities because they're too violent, that is white flight. If they stick around, then they're being oppressive. Jake Meador, the fellow I'm talking about is Dave Rubin and his husband. Jake Meador tweeted, for a certain type of anti-woke so-called Christian conservative, being anti-woke matters more than being faithful to church teaching. Oh, does the Christian church teach that two men can come up with a baby? No, it doesn't. This is conservatism brought to you by Claremont and the Bronze Age pervert, and loads of professing Christians are apparently 100% fine with it. William M. Briggs, statistician of the Stars, commented, why, yes, Bronze Age pervert is a better Christian than this. Chris Rufo had tweeted to Dave Rubin and his husband, congratulations and RIP to sleeping for the next few years, because they're not going to have any nannies or anything like that. No, of course they wouldn't. They're just going to be staying up all night and wrestling with feeding and diapers and croup and all that. No, they're not. You know the cliche. We all know the cliche from movies and TVs that baby wakes up and cries in the middle of the night, and oh, dad is told, well, it's your turn. Um, sorry about that. Women have a different relationship to babies than men do. In fact, their bodies secrete a hormone when their children are in distress. The male body secretes no such hormone. Babies are very difficult to deal with, but and women are much, much better at it than men. So, no, I don't really think that Ruben and his partner are going to be missing much sleep. So we all love the military again, right? We all love killing people again, and we all like talking about a mutually assured destruction and World War III. Well, again, I lived through the Cold War, and not very many people, outside what the Rand, what's it called, the Rand Corporation, like talking about mutually assured destruction. It was too terrifying. But now we are. Sam Dexter writes at the American Sun. War makes things real. It cuts at the joints. Ukraine will not allow men aged 18 to 60 to flee the country. Defense of the homeland calls. Trans women are now considered male and must stay behind and fight. A trans man decided to fem up to pass as a woman again to flee fighting. Zelensky enjoys a publicity campaign crafting an image of a machismo war leader waging a heroic defense of his nation. Martial values return to the good behaviors column. Will America decide to turn the Titanic and promote the same? This is an unlikely pivot because the entire egalitarian leftist worldview that controls our government policies relies on denying it. Prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were memes mocking the machismo, recruiting ads for the Russian military dying at the hands of a Tumblr looking Western female ordering drone strikes. There is truth to this, as drone warfare can be handled by any pilot anywhere. It is quite the statement revealing asymmetric tech differentials. America is casualty averse, and even in World War II was seeking ways to use tech to minimize the horrific grind of war. We have laser guided missiles today, but even in World War II, we touted our visually enhanced, accurate bombing runs. Spending on intricate weapon systems lines corporate pockets and allows our Pentagon to push the woke military staffing. Yes, and as mentioned earlier, it was all woke military before that, and trans in the military. So our author asked the question, are we going to see a pivot to masculinity? He replies, there will be no pivot under the current regime. To allow it would be to call into question the egalitarian lie and nudge people towards other sacred egalitarian cows. It is ideology over competency. An indicator for this is that approach to sanctions causing massive disruptions in the energy sector. The Biden administration is not downshifting the green energy future in favor of a massive domestic drilling program. There is no easy pen stroke to allow the completion of the Keystone Pipeline. Current progressive ideology will not allow it. The closest America may come might be television advertisements glorifying the castrated trans women lifting, shooting, and defending the amazing American empire. Men may be praised for their martial strength, but only in a wig with painted nails and neutered. And the aforementioned Bronze Age pervert has weighed in on this at the American Sun, which is a website I recommend to you. And BAP writes, when I look at this terrible brother war and the way not only Russians and Ukrainians are fighting, but also in a kind of online parody of the real carnage, the various factions of the right among themselves, I could only think of the cheering in the Coomer lactation rooms at Langley. I could think of a tranny apparatchik cackling to himself in Virginia, or the other schizo Claire Danes type trannies at NATO cyber campaigns quarters in Europe. Maybe I can think of their masters among the families and organizations that have treated Ukraine like a trafficked 16-year-old cargo container kidnappee from Mariupol, hoard out by gold-chained Sabra pimps to Qatari scatologists. I could think of the hidden worm rulers of the West, at once desperate that one of their main bases of operations and plunder is endangered, but also so relieved that in this outburst of hysteria, they've managed to unite much of popular sentiment in the way they were unable doing the Wuhan grids and St. Floyd fakeries. In relieved flatulence, they thank Moloch for having deflected popular attention from their crimes and given them this temporary cure. Sometimes I imagine Zelensky and the rest of the hand-picked performing entertainment industry clowns of the Ukrainian so-called government, installed by pantsuits and yentas in the American security state, at their Hollywood-constructed set in Lvov or Krakow, enjoying lobster risotto and heroically calling in front of green screens of Kiev upon 16-year-olds from Kharkov to run under the treads of Russian tanks. Yes, it's a long essay. BAP is not known for being short, but again, I commend this to you. And this is something from Lou Rockwell's site, from Boyd Cathy. I've been writing and saying in numerous essays and articles published since 2013 that Fox News, that is the news portion of the media operation, serves as a propaganda voice for the neoconservative globalists of the managerial deep state. That much should be clear simply by tuning in for a few minutes to watch Fox News' over-the-top coverage of the Ukrainian conflict. It's nothing new. Two prominent examples immediately come to mind. Both primetime announcer Brett Baer, author of A Potboiler praising Ulysses Grant, and Brian Kilmeade, author of an unserious volume praising the collaboration of Abraham Lincoln and radical revolutionary Frederick Douglass, serve as a zealous amen corner for American intervention globally. Both books were no doubt written with critical collaboration from ghost writers. And who can forget the unbridled globalism and anti-Trumpism of the late Charles Krauthammer and his boast that after the fall of communism, we now live in a unipolar world, controlled essentially by American business and political elites and the U.S. State Department, and anyone who stands in our or their way must be taught, quote, a lesson in American democracy, unquote. Just as our federal government had saved the Union in 1861 to 65 by beating down those unprogressive racist Confederates and their traitorous leaders, so now America must go round the world to enlighten it, but all the wonders and blessings of our form of liberal democracy. Whether in Syria, where Fox was joined at the hip to the late John McCain's frenzied calls for the United States to intervene against the legitimate and Christian-supported government of President Bashar Assad, as McCain stood on the ground arm in arm with ISIS-connected guerrillas, or its plea that American soldiers must stay in Afghanistan long after the imposed 20-year U.S. experiment in democracy had been deemed a failure, or now with its unbelievably propagandistic coverage of the conflict in Ukraine, Fox News is not adverse to employing disinformation and extreme emotionalism in the causes it advances. As I do each morning, Cathy relates, but only for a few disagreeable minutes, Tuesday, March the 15th, I switched on Fox and Friends. The program ended with the network offering its viewers a performance by pop singer Vladimir John Ondrasik of his new so-called patriotic song, Can One Man Save the World? As I listened to Ondrasik and the words of his song, the motivation and object were apparent. The embattled president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, has become the new savior of the world, indeed a near-perfect, holy, Christ-like figure sent from heaven to lead the peoples of the earth into a new age, annealed in democracy, freedom, and accompanying exaltation, despite the fact that the country he leads is probably the most corrupt and undemocratic in Europe. And Brian Kilmeade, seizing the moment and deeply affected by Ondrasik's cloying paean, almost genuflected in homage. Here was the Abraham Lincoln of Ukraine, leading his beleaguered nation against those awful pro-Russian secessionists in Donetsk and Lugansk provinces, which have declared their independence from Kiev. Kyiv. The flag these states have adopted is modeled on the Confederate battle flag, and against the forces of the new Satan himself, of Vladimir Putin, brooding and mentally deranged, crouching in the dark recesses of the Kremlin.
But Vladimir Zelensky, who is he really? Well, he is a comedian and former performing drag queen who was literally plucked out of nowhere to become the current president of Ukraine. Archbishop Carlo Vigano, former apostolic nuncio in the United States for the Catholic Church and a highly informed observer of Eastern European cultural and political matters, offers this picture. Quote, Zelensky's performances as a drag queen are perfectly consistent with the alphabet people ideology that is considered by his European sponsors as an indispensable requirement of the so-called reform agenda that every country ought to embrace, along with gender equality, abortion, and the green economy. No wonder Zelensky, a member of the World Economic Forum, was able to benefit from the support of Klaus Schwab and his allies, including George Soros, to come to power and ensure that the Great Reset would also be carried out in Ukraine. In his homeland, many accuse him of having taken power away from the pro Russian oligarchs, not to give it to the Ukrainian people, but rather to strengthen his own interest group and at the same time remove his political adversaries. Unquote. After his election, Zelensky closed 7 opposition television channels, suppressed the opposition press, and arrested and accused the leader of the major opposition party in Ukraine, Arsen Medvedchuk, of treason, while naming his friends and associates to powerful and lucrative high positions in government. Well, I guess you can't make how would I put it, a secular paradise without breaking a few eggs. In a few minutes, I'm going to be discussing a gasp Russian film, uh, which is called White Sun of the Desert from 1970. I had planned this before the imbroglio in Ukraine. Funny how things work sometimes. Let's take a look at Summit News. This is from Paul Joseph Watson. Italian newspaper La Stampa has denied accusations it engaged in disinformation by publishing a front-page photo of a Ukrainian ballistic missile strike on Donetsk while suggesting it had been carried out by Russia. The daily news outlet promised readers coverage of Russian attacks in Kiev and Lvov along a headline that read, "The Carnage." The headline was illustrated with an image of a man covering his face in grief as dead bodies lie around him, along with lines about traumatized children in Lvov and Kiev preparing for the final assault by Russian troops. The photograph actually showed the aftermath of a ballistic missile strike on Donetsk, the capital of a pro-Russian breakaway republic in eastern Ukraine, after it was hit by a tactical Tochka-U ballistic missile that was almost certainly launched by Ukraine. Whoops! However, editor-in-chief Massimo Gianni vehemently denied in an interview that the publication had deliberately misled readers. He said, "The thing that bothers me most and pains me a lot is that there are also some people here in Italy, some disgraced people of the web, who amplify this and call it a case of disinformation. Where is the disinformation?" Unquote. How about right there on your front page, Massimo? Yes, they lie and they lie and they lie. And the New York Times, what was it, a week or two ago, said, yeah, this Ukrainian propaganda has been kind of economical with the actuality. In fact, outright lie after lie after lie, but it's for a good cause. So it's all right. Now, this was a curious admission for the New York Times to make. And of course, it pretty much disqualifies all of the reporting on any subject, particularly subjects to do with the American government. The American government says this, that, and the other about the dangers of the coronavirus and of the safety and efficacy of mRNA treatments. Well, what if these are all lies? Well, they're lies in a good cause, so that makes it all right. Excuse me. Again, uh, they think they're going to get away with it, and I suppose they have gotten away with it. Of course, the the New York Times does occupy a valuable place, which is that if you want to know what the regime is thinking, look at the New York Times. It is America's Pravda. The communists used to say in the last century that communism is 20th century Americanism. I adapted this some years ago, that Americanism in this century, Americanism, or the global American empire, if you will, is 21st century communism. Of course, they don't lie. They just speak a deeper truth. And, you would have to be a wicked person to take issue with a deeper truth, or any manner of deeper truths. Ogan's Iron says, never known that much about Italian politics, but lately they seem to be fanatical lapdogs of NATO and the WEF. Oscar Toe says, I guess purging the internet of all Hunter Biden laptop material was not disinformation campaign at all. Ogan's Iron says, selling children, maybe Rothbard, but sounds like something Walter Block would now I'm repeat that. I knew Walter Block a little in the old days when he was still a Canadian. He used to appear on a talk show that I produced in Vancouver when he was at the Fraser Institute, which is in Vancouver. Murray Rothbard was a supporter of Pat Buchanan. So he seems to be, I don't think it would be unfair to call him a social conservative. Again, from Oscar Toe, really, though, does it matter if the GOP wins the midterms? Just look at them lately. Hannity wondered aloud to his guests whether Putin is sick because he looks bloated. Oh, okay. Zelensky has been looking pretty rattled in recent footage. And of course, he is the brave defender of Kiev, and he will fight like Salvador Allende. You might remember that the original story about Salvador Allende was that when the when the fascists were closing in on the presidential palace, he committed what they call revolutionary suicide, and then the communists decided this might sound a little weak, so then they came up with a different story that he died with his boots on, brandishing a rifle, perhaps a machine gun. We don't know where Zelensky is. We have no idea where he is. Hello, Dancing Band. I've been in a middle management corporate job for 5 months now and feel vulnerable to cancellation at any minute. All my colleagues are part of the hive mind, hook, line, and sinker. I'm sorry to hear that. My advice would be to keep stum. Just to keep stum. That you hear a bunch of nonsense and you nod your head. Yeah. There's no need to volunteer anything, But lots of people think that, they're going to take a stand. Now, if it's something, like being forced mRNA jabs, that's one thing. But, the latest wheeze from the HR department, that's a little different. And do we have anyone else here? Hello to Palcasso 88. Are you ever going to leave that hotel, says Radayan Raskolnikov. I'm beginning to think that you like it. No, I don't like it. I don't like to talk about my personal life much on this show. Some things have come up. Well, you can see this here. It's been a month, and I still am wearing this eye patch. I have had some other rather alarming health problems. Yeah. Let's, and I'm not going to go into them unless it becomes, if I disappear from this space, then, yeah, I guess I'll let everyone know what's happening. But who else can we talk about? Well, I promised I was going to, I was not going to neglect Tainter, and I'm not. So let's get back to his book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. And again, this discussion of various theories or hypotheses, which would be more accurate, about the causes of civilizational collapse. Although often lumped with Spengler's decline, Arnold Toynbee's A Study of History, 1962, is of a very different nature, and indeed Toynbee was critical of Spengler therein. In 12 volumes, the study is a life work, published from 1939 to 1961, and shows expectable evolution and change in the author's views. Yet some basic premises and assumptions are present throughout. Toynbee's view of the development of civilization was his famous challenge and response. A society encounters a succession of problems, each a challenge to undergo an ordeal. For example, the challenge of the Nile swamps to the early Egyptians. A challenge leads to economic development. Ease is inimical to civilization. By surmounting such challenges, civilizations develop. The collapse of a civilization in turn entails a loss of creative power, a failure of vitality. So the Maya collapsed while Egypt didn't, because later generations of Mayans had ceased the exertions needed to maintain mastery over nature. In contrast to Spengler, Toynbee saw civilization as a fresh, a dynamic movement that might be full of meaning. Its expansion is to be commended for being slow but sure. An accumulation of unmet challenges, though, can be the beginning of cultural collapse. This is an internal process. The ultimate criterion and the fundamental cause of the breakdown of civilizations is an outbreak of internal discord through which they forfeit their faculty of self-determination. Such an outbreak leads to conflicts between geographically segregated communities and to schisms between socially segregated classes. The result is a division of society into three opposed classes: a dominant minority, who develop philosophies and establish universal states, for example, empires; an internal proletariat, who establish a universal church; and an external proletariat, who become barbarian war bands. Thus went the Roman Empire, the universal state of Hellenic society. Horizontal schisms represent an increasing disintegration of the soul. The breakdown of civilizations are failures in an audacious attempt to ascend from the level of primitive humanity, being the life of a social animal, to the height of some superhuman kind of being in a communion of saints. This involves, as noted, a loss of creative power in the souls of the creative individuals or the creative minorities. These compensate for the loss of creativity by resorting to coercion, which leads to the establishment of an imperial universal state. In civilizations, geographical expansion and spiritual growth vary inversely. Major geographical expansion is then a sign of social disintegration. Sounds topical. And yet, quote, in this conflict between a proletariat and a dominant minority, we can discern one of those drastic spiritual encounters which renew the work of creation by carrying the life of the universe out of the stagnation of autumn through the pains of winter into the ferment of spring, unquote. Toynbee's emphasis on moral and spiritual values found prior expression in the work of Albert Schweitzer. Schweitzer argued that if an ethical foundation is lacking, a civilization collapses. Civilization exists in the effort to perfect humanity and originates when a population is inspired to attain progress and to serve. Schweitzer characterized Western civilization of the 1920s as showing signs of collapse. A volume published in the same year as Schweitzer's shows one particular extreme of thought. It should be read only by persons who have a firm sense of the historical relativity of knowledge. To Towner, civilization has a basis in pliable biology. With civilization, the nervous system is augmented, the intellect develops, the spiritual stature increases. Towner never clearly defined what he meant by augmented nervous organization, but it figured prominently in his theory. Whatever it is, he equated it with sexual frigidity and suggested that women who have such nervous organizations tend to produce geniuses. As such women in civilizations are less often forced into maternity, the proportion of genius progressively declines and civilizations wither away. Schweitzer. That was a name. When I was a young man or a boy, he was considered to be one of the greatest people alive, one of the greatest people who had ever lived. He was born in 1875. He died in 1965. And yes, he was a philosopher. and he was one of the greatest organists, particularly extolling the work of J.S. Bach. And then he moved to Africa. Faith shown through works. I'm just reminded, I don't know, Vladimir Nabokov, the famous Russian author, he had a detestation of Schweitzer. I'm not exactly sure, but he once said, above all, I hate thee for doctors, Dr. Freud, Dr. Castro, Dr. Schweitzer, and Dr. Zhivago, the latter, of course, being not a man, an actual man, but a character in fiction. Perhaps Nabokov was envious because Boris Pasternak, the half Jewish, half Russian author, again, another Russian, of Dr. Zhivago, was awarded the Nobel Prize for literature. Let's talk about the Rose City. That would be Portland, Oregon. And I've extolled the reporting work of, and also the analytical work of my old friend Dennis Dale many times on this live stream, and previously on Luke Ford's, when Dennis Dale used to make appearances. He's from California, from Norwalk, California. He moved to Seattle for work. He was trained in the Marines as a helicopter mechanic, and then he worked in the aeronautics industry, Boeing and other companies. And with Clinton, a great deal of that work dried up. Dennis has done various things. A few years ago, he moved from Seattle to Portland, and he provides us with an occasional diary of the destruction of this beautiful and once quite pleasant city. PDX diary, March the 16th, the sun and Chris abide. The same March sunlight obliterates the tattered gray clouds with the same brilliance as every year, oblivious to the city's transformation. With blithe equanimity, it alights upon the contorted maw of the schizophrenic no less than upon the fair face of the young woman going wide around him. And the same pure light graces the puerile Black Power murals as the occasional classic architectural line. Our world is changed, and the weather is indifferent. Suddenly, portable toilets are posted at intervals along the stretch of Barber Boulevard, south of downtown, appearing as if overnight. Here and there are pods of 3, like banks of phone booths. One of these appears placed to service an encampment I've been watching sprawl up a wooded hillside for months. Days ago, I saw a cleanup crew, one Mexican with a pickup, hauling garbage out with a wheelbarrow to his truck a good quarter mile up the road. On the other side of the street, past a broken vehicle gate, there's a dirt service road paralleling the highway just out of sight, abounding with heaps of refuse even the homeless no longer want. And there is a picture provided. And there's more pictures of forests or near forests absolutely inundated with garbage of all kinds. The homeless are migrating down the highway out of downtown into Portland's southwest, where they are still few. Before the 1-2 punch of COVID and Black Lives Matter rioting, the Southwest Conservative Neighborhood Association had been taken out by the city and activists making way for the rezoning that will densify and diversify this calmer quadrant of the city and make it more welcoming to the homeless. The economic deprivation since has slowed the Progressive Real Estate Developer Alliance and their plans. Developments are going up all around downtown, such as the massive Boomer Basin, for an active 62-plus clientele rising up in a grim forest of rebar nearby that I whistle past like a graveyard. But these represent a clot of projects delayed by COVID, and the forecast is for less development as downtown businesses continue to fall out even as the buildings go up. Yet the people still come, many abandoning the rural south of the state, and the increase in rental trucks I've been noticing lately aren't escapees, but arrivals. The park blocks across from the still barricaded New Normal Justice Center and federal courthouse are empty, and just a dozen or so tents with no visible human presence, the last stubborn trace of the occupation of 2020, line Main Street where the elk statue once stood. From the advantage of his elevated position atop an obelisk, perpetually vigilant doughboy of the Soldiers' Monument survives the iconoclastic racial reckoning, but he couldn't save the good settlers of the Promised Land, promise broken. Their pedestal remains with the inscription quoting Thomas Jefferson, imploring settler and Indian alike to live in peace in the conquering but benevolent embrace of Uncle Sam. Cops kill, taunts the graffiti on the soldier's obelisk, referencing a policeman killed by friendly fire recently. Oh, cops kill cops. Okay. A junkie on the nod and I are the soldiers' only company. And there are pictures here of various monuments in Portland which have been desecrated. Chris, I called out. He was passing me by, oblivious, hobbling along in the orthopedic boot he's been wearing on his wrecked right foot for years. Oh, hey, Dennis, he said in his lilting slur, turning his sleepy eyes on me, smiling. How you doing? I'm all right. How you doing? Holding up? It's been almost a year since he fell back onto the streets after a respite of 4 months or so renting a room. His booted leg was mangled in a work accident, he said. He's a carpenter. But I know he's got a drug problem, too. You still over there? I mentioned North. He had been living in a tent pitched near a homeless center in Old Town where he could get food and an occasional shower or phone call. It's rough here, he said when I saw him there last year. Those guys over there are dealing. He indicated a tent complex nearby where a fat black brother skulked. Lots of crazy people out here. He had been recently beaten up. I've been in more fights these last 3 months than in my whole life. These young guys will challenge me to fight, he grimace smiled, and I don't know how. He laughed bitterly. I never hit anyone in my life. They were singling him out because he's weak and makes for good practice. I thought. Shit rolls downhill on the streets, I imagine, and one bullies one who bullies another. I don't know how to fight, he complained. I can't even lift this arm over my head. He raised it weakly, a quarter rotation to demonstrate. That was almost a year ago. Today, he told me he found a bed in a shelter. I know the place near Union Station, which naturally is rotten with homeless. It looks rough, I said. He nodded. It beats sleeping on the street. I noticed his right hand was swollen and grotesquely at the joints. The skin was red purple and taking on a sheen. The base of this thumb was like a small plum. The hand looked like a rubber prop. He noticed me, appraising it. I got nerve damage. I can't close this hand at all. He demonstrated, weakly flexing the fingers. I got beat up again on Christmas. He shook his head with a grimace. They hit me with a bat. He pointed at his right eye with his club hand. His temple looks dented there as if by a ball-peen hammer. Yeah, he said with morbid enthusiasm. I'm all effed up along here. He indicated his side. I can't really see out of this eye. As always, with the same miserable grin, he relates his troubles, shaking his head. Jesus, you need anything? Nah, he says, turning dark as if delivering an unfortunate diagnosis. You want to smoke? I ask. What do you smoke? Marlboro Reds? I smoke whatever, he smiled. Come on, I'm going to buy you a pack of cigarettes so I can bum one. He protests briefly, but falls in as I head north. The wretched little 24-hour convenience store near an off-track betting place has been cleaned up a bit. The usual collection of the most wretched of the homeless is not occupying the alcove of the abandoned store next door. I chuckled bitterly at the price. How do the homeless afford it? Back out front, I handed Chris the smokes, and he gave me one back. I coughed a little, drawing the smoke in along with the crisp air. You need a ride? I asked. Nah, he said glumly. Nowhere to go. I watched him trundle north on 4th Avenue, wondering, as always, if this will be the last I see of him. Oi, Dennis! It was my neighbor Malachi in his Irish brogue. I was back home. Oh, hey, I said, putting my keys away. How you doing? Fine, fine, he says. As we engage in small talk, the subject of the homeless comes up. He's read a recent news report that 70% of our record-breaking traffic fatalities last year were homeless pedestrians. I heard. I guess the mayor instituted a ban on camping near freeway on-ramps and the like, but he's catching hell even for that. Can't tell people where to live. You know what happened to my friend? Of course I don't. Okay, he's over on the bike. I pretend I understand, but it doesn't matter. He's making a right turn, you know. He's making a right turn, yeah. Malachi tends to repeat phrases. And there's a bus there, you know, a city bus pulled up to a bus stop, yeah? And Bob, you know, he can't see around it, you know. And he goes to make a right turn coming around the back of the bush, right? Right, I nod. So he's looking. He mimes someone's hands on the wheel, looking over their left shoulder for traffic, for cars coming, right? Again, I nod. And he punches it, you know, thinking it's clear. Next thing he knows, Bob says, a homeless guy. He didn't see. Bob was blocked. Boy, the bush, he didn't see. Crashes into the windshield. Holy shit. Yeah. Bob says the guy breaks the windshield and goes over the roof in the car and comes down in the rear windshield too, and it breaks. Yeah, that's how hard Bob hit him, yeah? He pauses courteously to let me absorb this. So, boy, now Bob has his breakers only down, yeah? And the poor bastard comes back over the roof of the car, and lands in the street in front of it. I let him know how impressed I am by this story. So they call 911, yeah? And an ambulance takes the guy away, and nobody says anything to Bob, you know, and he goes home. And he's worried, right? He's worried about this guy, and he might be in some trouble, yeah? So he goes to the cops, you know, and he tells him his story, right? And they tell him not to worry about it. Just go home, they say. What about the homeless guy? He's in hospital, yeah. They didn't say how he is, but they told Bob to go home. They don't pursue these cases now. They say, no worries, I guess. No worries, I guess. Dennis Dale has met a lot of these people of the streets in Portland. So, well, I would say it's not something that I would do, but I meet a fair amount of these people, often unwillingly, outside my hotel room or in the streets adjacent to my hotel. I just mentioned that a few years ago, when I was absolutely destitute, I used to go down to the Salvation Army on Wharf Street, not far from here, about a 5-minute walk, because they had free meals. First, well, it used to be 4 times a week. Then they cut it back to 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And sometimes you could get bread there as well, which would tide me over the days when they didn't have the free meals. I used to get there early. The meals started at noon, but I would get there just after 11 o'clock because the lineup would be long and I did not want to wait. So I would, bring a book and read in the lineup. And I got to know some of the people who were regulars there, and I discovered, well, you will have been told probably that no one is homeless by choice. I met a number of people who were homeless by choice. Some of these people were head cases. Others, I suppose, were discipline cases. So several of them told me that they had been offered, apartments. Well, they'd have to sign on to welfare, and they would have no truck with social workers. They didn't want to be bossed around by the man. So they chose to sleep rough. And they all had their favorite spots for sleeping rough. Well, one of them, he had been, in the military, and later he'd owned a fishing boat. And how exactly he got to this situation, I don't know. But he told me he would sleep in the backyard of a home up in the hills, in Uplands, which again is Victoria's richest neighborhood. And he said that, one night, I guess the father of the household observed him and made a panicked call to the police. And he told me that the police arrived and they checked this fellow out, and they told the homeowner that, this was a special case, that he was not to be arrested. In fact, he was not to be disturbed. It sounds crazy, I know, but I had talked to this man at some length over quite a few days, and I had no reason to disbelieve him. I'm going to go to Theater Thursday in just a second. But before that, look at the chat here. Visionary Companion says, I met numerous homeless by choice types at Sure Shot Coffee in Seattle. One of them had even published a pamphlet on homeless lifestyle tips. Consultanoff says, Julius Evola considered Sovietism and Americanism to be equally noxious. Hello to Kyle Free. Consultanoff says, press 1 if Erin Burnett makes you want to destroy your TV. She's such a good-looking woman, you know. She's one of those women, and I know a lot of women hate this. A lot of women become kind of hysterical about it. Why don't you smile more? You're so pretty. She is very pretty. Yeah, Erin. Very Irish, you know. Kevin sounds like he kissed the Blarney Stone, says Oscar Toe. Emma Kelly Sir says, nice brogue. I was wondering how Rush would treat this Ukraine situation. War. That's how he would have treated it. Sean Dumity is going berserk lately. He really is not bright, Sean Hannity, you know. He has gone so far for someone who is dumb. And he doesn't have any minority points. Right? You know, I mean, he's just a dumb Irishman. And I'm impressed. I'm impressed that he's pulled this off for so long. Do we have anyone else here? Okay. Who was an objectivist? Oh, yeah, okay. Funny thing about the objectivists, you know, this is Ayn Rand's crowd. Murray Rothbard was part of the original crew. He became disillusioned, and he left the group because and he wrote a famous satirical short story about it with the Randians or the Randites denouncing Mozart for something or other, perhaps not appreciative of capitalism. Rothbard, who was Jewish, was married to a Protestant Christian woman. Ayn Rand demanded that he divorce his wife. And Rothbard told her to go to hell, you know. Now, there's a very strong Canadian connection to the Randites. That of the original Randites, all but one of the members were from the same Winnipeg Jewish family. Nathaniel Brandon being the most famous, and of course his name wasn't Brandon. Ayn Rand, that wasn't her name either. She got it from Remington Rand, the typewriter company, and so he chose Rand and then sort of, you know, put some letters around it. And they had a sexual relationship for quite a long time, despite her being considerably older than him. And then he met a woman his own age, or perhaps a little younger or whatever, and he started an affair with this woman, and Ayn Rand found out, and it was as if, you know, Judas had betrayed Jesus. Of course, you know, the Randites it's all hideous. It's ridiculous, you know, but it is also hilarious at the same time. Now, I'm going to open some tabs here. And this film that I'm talking about is indeed a Soviet film from 1970. It is directed and co-written by Valentin Yezhov, and it is called White Sun of the Desert. I have previously spoken of or reviewed one Russian or Soviet film previously on Theater Thursday. I became aware of this movie because this fellow called Tim Newman, who I follow on Twitter, and he follows me, and he wrote a novel, a satire of thruples. His Twitter feed or his blog, which he doesn't keep up anymore, is called White Sun of the Desert. So I was curious about this. By the way, I looked into I looked into DVDs, Blu-rays. There are no Blu-rays available. Uh, DVDs. I don't know whether you can get a DVD in the United States or in Britain. You can, however, rent this at Amazon Prime for the low price of $1.99, or you can buy it in high definition for the low price of $4.99. And I didn't really know what to expect about this movie. I know that it is one of the most popular Russian films ever made, but of course, that could mean anything, right? I really enjoyed this movie, and it was, well, it's strange to me, you know, because it is set in the 1920s in what later became Turkmenistan, and it is about the Red Army hunting down bandits. Now, you are thrown into this film in media res. You're not told where you are. They talk about the sea, the Great Sea, and I think the name Caspian appears. Oh, so it must be the Caspian Sea. You're not told the year. You're not told who's who and what's what. And you are not told about these bandits. So who are these bandits? The Basmashi, they're called. And the Basmashi came about because of Bolshevik atrocities against the Muslims. I mean, killing 50,000 in a short period of time. That's, pretty impressive even for the Bolsheviks. Most of the people, almost all of the people in this film are Muslims. And it is, how would I say, very old school harems, you know? There is no attempt to, explain the behavior of these people, to put it into any kind of context. Not that that is necessary. Their actions, particularly the bandit leader, Black Abdullah, as he's known, are, well, savage. They seem to have little regard for human life. On the other hand, the Bolsheviks had very little regard for human life. So we see the desert. We see the vast desert of Turkmenistan, and we see a man. We see a man dressed in a Red Army uniform. Well, he's got the cap, a white cap with the badge, and he's dressed in white, and he's wearing jodhpurs and puttees, and we see him walking in the desert, and we see a very strange thing. We see a man with his head sticking out of the sand. He's been buried in the sand to die and to be pecked alive by vultures. And we see one of these hideous birds, looking for its opportunity. Now, much of the movie takes place in fantasy, actually, because our hero, Sukov, that's how most people that's what people call him, is Fyodor Ivanovich. It's his full name. He is a soldier. What his mission is, we don't really know. He tells us at the beginning of the film that he's returning home, that the proletarian army seems to have won. It's just a mopping up operation now, and that the workers are in charge, and so he's returning home. But he doesn't seem to be returning home. And we are shown the first of the flashbacks of his wife, his beloved wife, and we learn that they are farmers. We see a scythe or a sickle that he pounds to use in the fields. and he loves his wife. And again, much of the film is in the form of a letter written in his head, although it could be written, I suppose, in real life, to his wife, telling him that things have come up, in effect, and that he's going to be delayed. But he has, no doubt that he will rejoin her. Although at the end, some doubt creeps in. Or in one of these letters, he says, and if I don't come home, uh, he falls into these reveries where there's various imaginings of him with his wife or other more humorous situations. So back to the man buried in the sand. So our hero Sukov frees this man, and he asks him, "Why are you buried in the sand?" Well, he's buried in the sand because a bad man who killed his father killed his father and captured him, and again left him for the vultures. And we learned that this man's name is Saeed, and he has an ambiguous role in the movie because he is loyal to Sukov, because Sukov saved his life. He not only freed him, he gave him food and water and a dagger as well, useful in those parts, useful in all wild parts. And at various Saeed slips in and out of the movie, that we see him coming to Sukov's defense, often critically. We see him being absorbed into Black Abdullah's banditry. He has nothing in particular against a Black Abdullah, but again, he has his own mission to revenge himself on the man who killed his father and left him to die. So Sukov gets drawn into a strange situation where we see a kind of a little siege of a dwelling in those parts. Brick and mud. There are, well, this movie is one of those movies that's a testament to shooting on location, because it's all shot on location. And we see ruined museums, a ruined mosque, simple houses. This is just God-forsaken country, but there seem to be some people who are willing, who are able to flourish there. So Sukov, he comes into contact with a unit where he is much admired. Apparently, he has kind of legendary stature within the Red Army, at least the Red Army in Central Asia. And so it turns out that Black Abdullah has fled, and he is looking to flee the Soviet Union, or to a neighboring country. And he has abandoned his harem. And apparently at one point he had 11. There were 11 women in his harem. At this point, they are reduced to 9. And they are wearing burqas, and they all look, as Boris Johnson famously said, like pillar boxes. And Sukov is given the very strange task of leading these women to safety. Now, one of the reasons I enjoyed this movie so much is that even though it's a communist movie, or it's a movie made in a communist country, there's no proselytizing in it. None. Well, we are told that, under the glorious new regime, that women are free. They have all the rights of men. And harems are a thing of the past. One man can't have 9 wives, or even more than one wife. And there are various very. This is a movie. Is this an adventure movie? It's kind of a comedy, but a comedy in the style of, say, John Ford, who was obviously a huge influence on this film. And it's a drama, and there's a lot of variety in the emotions expressed in it. And Sukov, he tries to make it clear to these women that, again, they have been liberated, that the Red Army has liberated them. They are having none of it. Since he is in charge, they make it known that he is their husband now, and now he has 9 wives. Eventually, the faces and bodies of these women, still with some modesty, are revealed. And it turns out that several of them are really quite attractive. Um, Surkov doesn't give in to this attraction because he has a faithful wife at home. However, his the one soldier who he is given, Patruka, is not so strong of spirit, and he has an attraction to the woman who, in effect, Sukov makes the head of the harem, Gil Chatai. And as I say, she's a very attractive young woman. Petruka hasn't seen her face, but there's a shortage of eligible women in these parts, and he practically proposes marriage to her, but he would like to see her face. He says, what if she looks like a crocodile? This poor boy, Petruka, the movie, it does not go well for him. He suffers greatly. He is not heroic, like Sukov. We are also introduced. Again, we don't get anything in the way of establishing shots in this film. It's really quite radical, reminiscent of the French Nouvelle Vague in this respect. We're taken from one place and then we're put in another with no explanation whatsoever. And we're introduced in a very small settlement to this man called Pasha, who was a customs official who has fallen on hard times because he was part of the Tsarist regime, and so the communists, neither the communists nor the bandits, seem to have much time for him. He doesn't seem to serve any purpose. He lives alone with his long-suffering wife, and he drinks. He drinks a lot. Some foul, clear local spirit, unidentified. Of course, this is on the Caspian Sea, and we see sturgeon in the water. And there's an amusing scene where Pasha complains, "What, caviar again? I'm sick of caviar. Can't I have bread?" I thought it was funny in any event. Abdullah, as previously mentioned, means to escape with his booty and his men, but then he decides that, well, he wants his harem as well. And we see the folly of kindness, I suppose you could say, in a world like this. Well, a woman demonstrating kindness, that Abdullah, "Oh, water, please, please, can I have some water?" Well, he didn't get to be the head of a banditry without some native wiles, and he decides no, he wants his harem back, and he gets them, and he lets them know that they're horrible because they should have killed themselves after he deserted them. There's nothing like Long John Silver about this man, Abdullah. He's just a savage. And again, that's one of the things I really like about this film. That, oh no, we're not going to show you, oh, he's really a nice guy underneath. No, he isn't. He's not a nice guy at all. And we go back and forth from various locations, and our hero, Sukov, who is played very heroically by an actor called Anatoly Kuznetsov, he follows orders, and he is indefatigable, and he is quite clever too. I mean, he's a kind of a Superman, you know. And I won't spoil how the movie ends. There's a lot of sadness in this film, and there are several characters who we have come to like, who are killed. But it would be a false film if that did not happen. This was the most popular film of 1970 in the Soviet Union. I mentioned John Ford. There's a lot of jokes in this, corny stuff like an explosion blowing off the caps of these old Muslims who just spend all day leaning against some ancient building, smoking cat or opium or some such. They don't care about the world at all. Kind of like, old Indians you might see hanging outside around a fort or a general store in the John Ford movie. A lot of the phrases from this film became catchphrases in the Soviet Union. The Orient is a delicate matter is perhaps the most famous. One I didn't see in any list was this talk of death, and Sukov says, the dead have no problems, it's true, but it's boring. And there's a lot of these catchphrases. They really only make sense in a Russian or Soviet context. Of course, it's not necessary to understand the jokes in this film to appreciate it. The print that I saw was good. Now, as I say, there's an HD print on Amazon Prime, so presumably it's better. One of the things that you see in a bad print are washed out blacks. Well, the blacks in this film are really solid, are really quite solid. The music in this film is interesting. It's not scored as a Hollywood film would be. A lot of the music is interstitial, but there is a song written by Isaac Schwartz and Bulat Olitskava, which became a huge hit in the Soviet Union. And it's a very sad song about love and fate, and quite catchy. So I took a chance on this film, and I'm glad that I did. A curious thing about it, that the Soviet, or now Russian, cosmonauts, that their launch pad is in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, it's called, and it has become a tradition for all. It was a tradition for Soviet and now for Russian cosmonauts. It still is for all of them to watch this movie before they go into space. I suppose rather in the same way that apparently at the South Pole, at the Amundsen Scott Research Center there, at the first day, heading into winter, they all watch John Carpenter's The Thing. Anyway, I really liked this movie, and I highly recommend it. Let's have a look at the chat before I sign off. Kevin, do you like Dersu Uzala? Asked Chokin666. I have not seen that one. Jeffrey Pye says, will we get a Music Monday on your favorite soundtracks? That is an excellent idea. Thank you. Oscar Toe says, I just sprayed on some Stetson. I'm ready to find me some fine Irish fillies in the night. Brooke and Sultanov says, deserts can cause transformation per Paul Bowles, The Baptism of Solitude, referring to Sahara. Jean-Baptiste de Precariat says, the desert has little regard for human life. Yes, indeed. Gamian says, it's a classic. Everyone in Russia can quote from Hit. British American says, Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, Peppermint Patty. She's also known, gets so much mileage out of those fake black eyelashes. Okay, that's it. And, oh, yes, Emmett Kelly, sir, says the old paleo-libertarian, paleo-conservative alliance. Those were the days. Yes, I miss them. I indeed miss them. So I'm done. I'll be back tomorrow, Friday, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. And I am off for as the Irish would say, a drop or two.